Today we're recording the interview of Herb Dregalla. This interview is being conducted by Adrian Hill from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. The interview is being recorded at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. It is 9 a.m. on September 3rd, 2014. All right, Herb, where and when were you born?
I was born March 2nd, 1947, Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, who were your parents and what are their occupations?
My father's Herbert Dregalla Sr. He was a policeman in the city of Cleveland. My mother was Dorothy Dregalla, and she was a member of the typing pool, in charge of that at Union and Carbide.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I have an older sister, Joyce Dregalla Jager, younger brother Donald Dregalla, and second brother David Riley.
Okay. Were any of your siblings or close family in the military?
My father was a member of the Navy in World War II, but that's the only one.
Okay. Was your father deployed at all?
He was stationed in Chicago during the war.
Oh, okay. What were you doing before you decided to enter the service?
I was a college student. I went to school at Baldwin Wallace College and finished my bachelor's degree there, and then I enlisted.
Okay. Why did you decide to do that?
Why did I decide to enlist?
Yeah.
At that point, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I wasn't ready to start teaching yet.
Mm-hmm.
This was during the Vietnam War, and so if you could get a deferment for being in college, you could get a deferment for being a teacher, and again, I wasn't ready to teach yet, so I wanted to go to graduate school, so I enlisted in the band at West Point to put me close to New York City where I could perform in the band and fulfill my military obligation and still go to school at the same time.
Okay. So you went to school while you were enlisted?
I went to my master's degree, started it while I was in the Army band, and graduated the semester after I got out of the Army.
In what school?
Manhattan School of Music, New York City.
Okay. And where did you get your bachelor's degree?
Baldwin Wallace College, Berea, Ohio.
Okay. And what branch did you serve in?
United States Army.
United States Army, okay. Now, you enlisted rather than doing OCS or becoming an officer?
That's correct. At that time, there were a number of Army bands that were called special bands. I'm not sure if they're so designated that way as well. Essentially, what it meant was that it was an auditioned organization. You had to show up at the band and play a musical audition. So I had when I was a senior in college, I had an auditioning tour set up where I was going to start at West Point and audition there, and then go to New Haven, Connecticut and audition for the Coast Guard band, and then drive down to Washington, D.C. and audition for all of the bands there. The advantage of the special band was that you were guaranteed to remain at that position during your enlistment, or if you wanted to extend farther than that, you could continue at the band, so there was no sense of starting there for a year and then being transferred to another organization, being transferred to another organization. The other advantage was it was quick rank. I was E2 after basic training, and then by December of that year I was promoted to E5. Everyone that was in a special band was E5 or higher within 6 months of their enlistment.
Wow, okay. And you said you were at West Point the whole time then?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you choose that? Or?
That was the of all of the bands that I was going to audition for, that was the one of choice. It was the reason was its proximity to New York City. I mean, New York City is. I was a musician. I still am a musician, and New York is cultural center for music. So this was a way to study and take advantage of that while I was doing the Army as well.
Okay. And let's see, what instrument did you play?
Clarinet. I'm a clarinetist.
Okay. And you, so did you play that in high school and in college prior to this?
Yes, I've been playing clarinet. I started when I was in the 4th grade, and so I was a clarinet major in college, music education, and that was the instrument I auditioned on.
Okay. So did you have to go, when you enlisted, did you go straight to basic training then?
I did. I graduated early June of 1969, and a couple days after that I enlisted, did my basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Following basic training end of August, as I remember, I had a week or so of leave, and then reported for duty at the military academy.
Okay. So what was that like for you then? Did you guys go through the same basic training as everybody else did, correct?
It was the same basic training as everyone else. So I was regular Army.
Okay, so what do you recall, like, what that felt like? You know, you were leaving from college to go to basic training. Do you recall?
Basic training was an experience. Looking back at it now, I can, and even shortly after I finished basic training, I can understand the rationale for doing it. It was a matter of reducing everyone to a common level so that they could function as a unit, which is necessary for a military organization. It was not a lot of fun, but I can understand the necessity of being able to do that. So it was definitively a culture shock going from being a college student to a private E1 at basic training, but it was an experience. Was what it is.
Yeah. So do you recall any of your instructors or anything like that?
No, that was almost 50 years ago.
No. Okay. Let's see. Did you receive any specialized training after that?
No.
So you just went straight from
That's
basic
right.
to...
That's right. That's right. Like I said, the West Point band it was at that point considered a special band, and so I had to audition to get into the West Point band. There was, as I remember, some sort of Army musical school or something for people that were interested in performing in a band, and they would go to that school, and then they would be assigned to a band somewhere in the world. A post band to do whatever, and then my understanding again was that if a person did that, they would be at a band somewhere for 6 months to a year, and at the end of that time they could be reassigned to a different band, and at the end of that time they could be reassigned. They would always be a band member, but their location could vary. And like I said earlier, that was one of the advantages of a special band, is that number one, you knew that you were going to be there for at least the length of your enlistment, and a number of people decided that they liked performing in the band and they wanted to continue in that as a career, and so they extended and continued that, and that's obviously fine for them, but it was the guaranteed ability to know that you're going to remain there during your enlistment, and also, like I said, for me, the fact that it was close to New York City, so I could take advantage of the musical opportunities there.
How did you find out about that the special bands and stuff like that?
Boy, I don't remember that right now. There were a number of my friends that were at college with me at that time, and I remember a couple of them that were a year ahead of me. And again, they wanted to continue their graduate education, so they started a graduate school somewhere and found out that they were going to be drafted, and so that they enlisted and auditioned, and so somewhere in that culture, I obviously found out about a special band and planned the audition. I don't remember how I got that information specifically or not.
Yeah. Okay. So when you tried out for that, I mean, is that pretty competitive?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's. I made an arrangement. I showed up on that day. There was a couple of the clarinetists that were performing with the West Point band, and they met me and put me in a room, and I had to play clarinet for an hour for them. So there was material that I prepared that I played for them, and then there was a lot of sight reading where they would just give me a piece of music and said play it, and so you'd have to do it, play it. And so at the end of that point, they talked among themselves and said that they wanted me to be in the band, and so they wrote I got a letter from a chief warrant officer, who was one of the conductors of the band, saying that I had been accepted into the West Point band. And so when I got back to home, I went down to my local Army enlistment recruiter and gave him that letter and enlisted, and worked it again so that I would actually report to basic training a couple days after I graduated from college. So then once that paper was in process, I know that when I got to Fort Campbell, when I did my basic training there, I spoke with the company commander, and he had a record in my file that yes, in fact, I was going to West Point when I finished basic training. So the system worked.
Yeah. So when you were at basic training, you were with probably a lot of guys who were just turning 18, 19 then?
Yes, I mean there was a variety. There was a number of us, as I remember, that were college graduates. There were a number that were just getting out of high school. There were some that I remember were high school dropouts. It was a real mixed bag of people that were in basic training with me.
So I mean, did you struggle with that, being a little bit older, probably a little bit more mature?
No, not really. I mean, it was a group of people. I mean, some of them we got along real well. Some of them we didn't get along so well. We had some people from the city, some people from rural. It was in Fort Campbell, so there was rural Kentucky, rural Tennessee. Just a real mixed bag of people, which I suppose is probably the way it's supposed to be organized.
Mm-hmm. So before we move on to West Point, I want to ask you, so you got your bachelor's before you enlisted.
Correct.
And then you went right after you got out while you went, you were taking classes.
That's correct. And
then after you got your master's, correct?
That's right. I was in the, I enlisted in June '69, and it was a 3-year enlistment. So I was due to get out in June of 2012.
Okay.
2012 in 1972.
Oh, okay.
And the fall of 1971 was when President Nixon was phasing out the war in Vietnam, and so there was a big move to reduce the size of military. I don't remember all of the details, but there was a provision that if there was some sort of beginning point, if you were not going to school and started school, or if a job opened up and you could get a job immediately, you were eligible to get out of the Army up to 6 months early.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as it turned out, in December of 1971, probably early December '71, there was a man, don't remember his name now, who was teaching instrumental music in Newburgh, New York, which was just up the river from West Point, and he died. And so there was an immediate opening for an instrumental music teacher in Newburgh, New York, and so I applied for the job, and I was offered the position, and because it started in January 1972, that qualified me to be released from the Army early. So I was middle of December. It would have been, I think, late December that I would have been finished with my Army experience. But there was another provision because of Christmas holiday, they bumped that back a week, so it was like middle of December is when I finished with military, and then started the job in January of 1972.
Okay, and then so somewhere along the way, obviously, you got your doctorate.
That was afterwards. I got my master's degree in '72, and then I taught public schools in New York for an additional year, and then went back to Cleveland, which is where I was from, and taught high school there for 4 years. And while I was in Cleveland is when I started my doctoral work, and that took 5 or 6 years to finish that up. So.
So you're just kind of doing that in the evenings, stuff like that?
That's right. That was a part-time experience. I would go full-time. There's a full-time residency requirement, but I did my doctorate at Case Western Reserve, and they allowed me to do the full-time residency during the summers. So I did 3 summers of full-time school, and then took classes in the evenings during the other times.
Okay. All right. Well, let's kind of touch on your time at West Point here. So, how did you adapt, do you think, to the military lifestyle? I mean, after basic, obviously, you're kind of pushed into it, but after that, I mean, you're going, and I don't know how that unit was. So
yeah, it was a different experience. I mean, West Point is West Point. I mean, it's a historical unit, historical facility, and it was very much in public display. So when you were there, everything had to be correct. So I remember one time I was walking around the post, and I had just looking around, just not doing anything particular, and I had my hands in my pockets, and some sergeant came up to me and said, you know, this is West Point, you can't be walking around with your hands in your pockets. So I mean, it was very, very official. So it was still Army, and it was in some cases a very stylized, regimented experience because of the place where it was. At the other time, I was a musician, and there were a variety of very fine musicians that were in the band at that time, and so it was a good experience musically just to be in contact with that much talent. So it was sort of a mixed bag. It was definitively Army, but it was you know, music as well.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, what all did you guys do as the band? I mean,
it was support of the Corps of Cadets at West Point, and also various ceremonial functions. So when the cadets would have their parades on the main field that was there, we would be the band that would provide music for them to do that. We would be the band that would provide music for any funerals that were held at the West Point Cemetery. We played concerts for the cadets. There were concerts every summer on Sunday evenings down at the Trophy Point on the banks of the Hudson, looking up towards Newburgh. Attended by a lot of people. We would perform in parades, various communities around the area. There were times that we would play background music for visiting dignitaries, or we provided musical support for the United States Military Academy. I mean, at least at that point, there were military bands that were stationed at, I'm going to say, every installation. I'm thinking around the world. Mm-hmm. I know that when I was doing basic training, there was a band at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, that provided support for that location, so that when dignitaries would come in, they would provide the music or whatever. Well, we did the same thing at West Point, only because of its historical stature and because of the mission, it was at a higher level than what was at most other units around the world. Mm-hmm. So, but it was essentially that. It was support of the base and support of the Corps of Cadets.
Okay. So you guys probably, what was like a regular work day for you if you weren't performing?
Well, it was. We would rehearse every day, so it would start the first thing in the morning, and there'd be a general roll call meeting where we would all be in a room together, and there'd be announcements of what was going on. Mm-hmm. Then there would be a variety of rehearsals. There'd be a concert rehearsal. There was enough members of the band that everyone did not play in every concert. There would rotate around. So typically there would be a rehearsal that would go maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. Take a break, rehearse a little bit more. Then if there was a parade with the cadets during that day, then those people that were assigned to perform in that detail would have a 45-50-minute rehearsal going over that music. That would take up most of the morning. Afternoon would be potentially, if there was a funeral or a special assignment or something that would go on, those usually happened in the afternoon. And then several days a week there would be, like I said, parades on the main ground there for the cadets. And if you were assigned for that, you did that. So it was again doing all of those type of things. It was typically it was Monday through Saturday, but one of those days usually was not a work day because there were so many evening commitments and sometimes Sunday commitments. So it was Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday morning were the standard days, and then Tuesday, Saturday afternoon, evening, Sundays would be special things that would come up that the band would provide support for.
So do you find it, I mean, pretty time consuming then, or?
Yes and no. I mean, it was a full-time job doing that. But like I said, there was Tuesdays generally were not days that we were involved with anything, and so that was the day that I could drive down to New York City and take a class if I wanted to do that. And there were enough people that were going to school that if there was a conflict, we could swap responsibility. So if I was scheduled to perform a parade on Wednesday and I had a class or something that I needed to attend, I could have a friend of mine play that parade for me, and I would play his parade on Monday, and so we were able to work it around that way to do what we wanted to do.
Okay, so you said a lot of guys that were in the band, they also were in school?
Yes.
So that was a common theme among you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the schools in New York, like I said, I went to Manhattan School of Music. Some people went to Columbia. There was a number that went to Manus. Those schools knew that we were military and that we had time restraints that were placed on us because of our responsibilities for the military, and so they were flexible. If you needed to miss a class or you needed to come late or whatever, they were very flexible about doing that.
So what was the school called again? I'm sorry.
I went to Manhattan School of Music.
Okay, so did a lot of the guys that were in the band with you go there as well?
I'm not sure of a lot. I know there were a number that went to Manhattan. There were a number that went to Manus. There were a number that went to Columbia. There were some that just were not going to a university or a college, but were just taking lessons from a teacher in New York City. And the Army supported that. I mean, this was a special band. They were interested in maintaining the quality of the band, and so there was subsidy from the Army to take classes. There was subsidy from the Army to take lessons, and so it was a way to. They were interested in supporting that.
So they were helping you with paying for that.
Yes.
Then? Oh, okay. And what about after that? Did you have? Did you get the GI Bill?
I did. I used the GI Bill essentially to pay for my doctorate.
Okay. 1 second. Let me just kind of scroll down here. Okay. Did you guys ever get activated for anything else? I mean, were you pretty much just at West Point?
Just at West Point. Okay. Absolutely. And again, that was one of the attractions to be in that band, because you knew that you would be there during that time.
And did other bands ever come to West Point to do like big performances, or was it always just you guys and you guys took care of all of it?
It was just us, and we took care of it all.
Okay. How many people would you say?
Well, it was big at that point. It was. I'm going to say that the concert band was probably maybe 120, 130 musicians, and then there was a drum and bugle corps that was another 40 musicians on top of that. That was its own, was part of the the United States Military Academy Band, but it was its own subunit of that. And then everyone that was working in that unit, the clerks played instruments. There was a instrument repair facility that was there, and the technicians that were taking care of instruments and doing all of that were musicians, and so they played in a rock band, and there was a string quartet that played and did ceremonial things. There was a saxophone quartet that played. So everyone that was associated with that unit was a musician in some way. The first sergeant of the band was a percussionist and was the drum major. So it was all part of that. So I would say at that point there was probably 150, 200 musicians that were part of that unit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Were any of the guys, because I know you went to school for music prior to
Yes.
joining the military, were most of the guys like that, or were some of them straight out of high school?
There were some that were straight out of high school. Again, it would be, because it was a special band, it was competitive to be part of it.
Right.
And so at that particular time, the members of the band that were enlisting in the band were, for the most part, college-trained musicians, just because of the competitiveness.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say about West Point? Anything you want to touch on?
Not. I don't like. As I told you earlier, it was an interesting experience. I mean, it was something that I feel I was honored to serve there, but really my participation really was nothing remarkable. I did my job. I think I did it pretty well, but there was no special awards or anything. It was just serving at that particular post at that particular time.
Okay. Do you remember where you were when you finally got discharged out of the military?
I was still at West Point.
Okay. So you got your discharge papers mid-December, you said?
Mid-December 1971.
Okay, so pretty much did you leave right away, or were you on terminal leave? Or?
I left at that point. I went, again, I was, my enlistment was due to finish in June of 1972. And so I started December 71 thinking I've got another 7 months and then I'll be on with whatever else I'm going to do in my life. And this position opened up and I applied for it, and so I went from 7 months to like 7 days. And so because I had a job when I was discharged from the Army, I stayed there. I had an apartment that my wife and I stayed at. And, she had a job, I had a job, so we stayed in New York for another year and a half, just working. I went to West Point. Started there in August of '69 and remained there until December of '71.
Okay. So you said you went from 7 months to 7 days. Knowing that, I mean, were you pretty excited about that? Were you ready to get out? I mean,
I had always, yes, I was ready to be a teacher. That was when I started my undergraduate work. I knew that I wanted to be a band director, and so that was my goal. When I graduated from college, I knew at that point I was not ready to start teaching. I wanted to get my master's degree. I saw this as an opportunity to do that, and so when it came to be discharged, I was ready. I was, I did not regret the time that I was at West Point. In many cases, I enjoyed the musical experience. I met a lot of people. That was an honor to be around. But yes, I was ready to begin my teaching career, and so I was looking forward to that.
Okay, so let's see. Right after you got out, you started teaching for a year and a half. You said at that school.
I taught 6 months at Newburgh, New York, at a junior high school there, and then a high school job opened up at Wappingers Falls School District, which is on the other side of the Hudson River. And I had some friends that were there, and they told me about that, so I applied for that job and got that job. Taught there for 1 year, and then got a real good job offer back in Cleveland, which is where I was from, and so I moved back to Cleveland for 4 years and taught high school there before I started my college work.
Okay. And then after, let's see, when you went back to college for your doctorate, you said you were using the GI Bill for that?
GI Bill for that, that's correct.
Okay, and so you did how many years of teaching before you went back to get your doctorate?
Well, it would, from the time, like I said, again, I was discharged in 71, so I started teaching in January 72. It was probably, I'm going to say, September of 74, 75 that I started my doctorate.
You know, so how long did you say it took you?
Oh, I graduated in, what does that say? 83, so 74 to 83, probably sounds like 9 years to me.
Okay. How old were you at that time?
Boy, I think I was late 20s, maybe 28 when I started my doctorate.
Okay. So about mid-30s by the time you finished?
Mid-30s by the time I finished, yeah.
Okay. And then after that, what did you do after you got your doctorate?
Well, I taught 4 years of high school at Mid Park High School in Middleburg Heights, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And after those 4 years, I was offered a job as the director of bands at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I worked there 3 years. And then moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, where I was the director of bands at Nebraska Wesleyan University for 18 years, from 1980 to 1998, and then I applied for the job here at Wright State. I was the chair of the music department from 1998 to December of 2010, and then I did the semester conversion for a couple years and was the interim associate provost for a year, and then have been in my current position here in liberal arts starting my 2nd year.
It's the associate dean.
Associate dean.
Okay.
Right.
Now, how did you get into that, going from the music side to being over here?
Well, again, I was the when I came to Wright State, I was the chair of the music department. So I was, although no longer actively teaching. Well, I taught a class every year, but it was not. I was no longer a full-time teacher, and that was by choice. And then after doing that, the position of director of semester conversion came up, and that seemed like an interesting thing to do. And so, at that point, I made a decision to change a career path out of music. And so I did central administration for a couple years. Again, I was semester conversion, and then also interim associate provost for a year. And so, coming to liberal arts, because the Department of Music is in liberal arts, I have a little bit of connection now with music, but it was just a career decision to move into central administration, upper administration, as opposed to staying on the ground in the Department of Music. Okay.
All right. So we're going to go into some reflections really quick. What are some of the life lessons you learned from your military service?
Life lessons from military service. There are times that it is important for a variety of reasons to do what you're told without question. I think that was the basic premise of basic training. I think, again reflecting back on that, I mean, that's if you're in the military, and you're in combat, you don't have the opportunity to question orders as they come up. You've got to do what needs to be done at that time as part of a unit. That was, again, for a college student in the late 60s, that was cultural shock. And so that's what basic training was all about. And so that was, I mean, there are times that needs to happen. And so, I mean, I gained that, where I think a person that was not in the military wouldn't have that type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
The experience at West Point, looking back and reflecting on it now, was an opportunity. I mean, it was West Point is an incredibly historical location for a variety of different reasons, and to have the opportunity to have been there for just over 2 years and to have experienced that, I think is something that I look on back with pride.
Okay. How did your service impact your feelings about the military in general?
I think I am a supporter of the military. I feel, even though I never was deployed, and I was only stationed at West Point, I feel an affinity for members of the armed forces. When I was the interim associate provost, I actually oversaw the Army and Air Force ROTC here for a year, and I feel I had a good connection and was able to offer them support and understood what their mission was more because of the experience that I had as part of the military. So I feel good.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to leave for future generations that might view this? Any lessons or anything?
No, not really that I think anything else other than what I've said during the last half hour or so.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, all fine.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.